이스라엘 선교 전문 방송 브래드TV에서 진행하는 이스라엘 회복 순례 2017년 2월에 또다시 출발합니다. 지난 4년간 매번 봄과 가을에 진행하면서 그동안 많은 경험과 노하우를 축적해오며 이제는 명실상부한 명품 이스라엘 회복 순례로 자리매김을 해온 브래드TV의 이스라엘 회복 순례에 여러분을 초대합니다. 우선 2017년 2월 1일부터 9일까지 진행하는 올리브 코스는 이스라엘을 처음 방문하는 분들을 위한 코스로 예수님이 태어나신 베들레헴과 예수님이 40일 동안 금식 기도하셨던 유대 광야, 예수님의 품속과도 같은 사역지 갈릴리 호수, 그리고 예수님의 거친 숨소리가 배어있는 예루살렘의 감람산 비아 돌로로사, 이런 기본적인 성지도 방문하지만 그것보다도 더 중요한 것은 현재 하나님께서 이스라엘을 통해 어떤 일들을 하고 계신지 확인하는 시간을 가지려고 합니다. 제가 만든 영화 회복의 주인공인 데이빗 오르티즈 목사님 가정 방문과 메시아닉주 교회를 방문하여 이스라엘에서 예수를 믿는다는 것이 얼마나 힘든 일인지 그들에게서 직접 듣고 그들의 손을 잡고 위로하는 시간을 갖는 아주 특별한 시간을 가지려고 합니다. 매일 아침마다 이스라엘에 관한 강의를 진행하고 또 매일매일 그 현장에서도 특별 강의를 진행하면서 뜨거운 감동과 은혜의 시간이 될 것입니다.
제가 가장 꿈꾸던 거, 한번 꼭 와보고 싶은 거, 그리고 그런 곳에 와서 너무 감동을 많이 받았고
너무너무 감사했고요. 은혜 많이 받고 정말 이스라엘에 와서 눈물 없이 감동을 채우고 이번에 더 잘 온 것 같아요.
이스라엘을 이미 한번 다녀왔거나 좀 더 색다른 이스라엘에서의 경험을 기대하는 분들을 위해 마련한 무화과 코스는 2월 15일부터 23일까지 진행됩니다. 무화과 코스에서도 역시 기본적인 성지를 방문하기도 하지만 좀 더 이스라엘의 깊숙한 곳을 들여다보기 위해 유대인들이 자주 찾는 재래시장을 방문하여 그들의 삶의 모습을 이해하고 예루살렘과 텔아비브의 24시간 기도타워를 방문하여 뜨겁게 이스라엘을 위해서 기도하는 시간을 가지려고 합니다. 뿐만 아니라 네게브 사막의 베두인 텐트에서 하룻밤을 보내며 모닥불을 피워놓고 메시아닉 목사님의 설교와 메시아닉 찬양 가수의 찬양을 듣고 사막의 별을 올려다보는 아주 감동적인 시간을 가지려고 합니다. 특히 이스라엘 회복 순례가 진행되는 내년 2월은 이스라엘에서 꽃이 만발하는 가장 아름답고 가장 여행하기 좋은 시기라고 할 수 있습니다. 이미 수년간 여러 차례 진행해온 프로그램이라 저희는 이스라엘로 언제 가야 하는지, 그리고 어떻게 무엇을 보고 경험하며 어떤 시간을 보내는 것이 우리에게나 이스라엘에게나 서로 좋은 시간이 될 것인지 잘 알고 있습니다. 이번에도 역시 그 경험과 노하우를 최대한 활용하려고 합니다. 뿐만 아니라 마음은 간절하고 꼭 가고 싶지만 여행 비용 때문에 고민하고 망설이는 분들을 위해서 하나님께서 정말 귀한 분들을 만나게 해 주셨습니다. 저희 브래드TV가 춘천 신협과 업무 협약을 맺어서 여러분의 여행 비용을 1년에서 최장 3년까지 나눠서 아주 적은 비용으로 변제해 나갈 수 있게 되었습니다. 물론 이자도 다른 곳에선 상상할 수 없을 만큼의 적은 금액이죠. 춘천 신협이 이렇게 저희와 업무 협약을 하는 데에는 그만큼 저희 브래드TV를 믿고 신뢰하기 때문입니다. 그러니 이제 여러분은 당장 큰 돈이 없다 하더라도 부담 없이 저희와 함께 이스라엘로 떠날 수 있게 된 것입니다. 여러분, 이제 그만큼 이스라엘은 여러분 앞에 훨씬 더 가깝게 다가왔습니다. 그리고 여러분을 기다리는 이스라엘의 문은 활짝 열려 있습니다. 저는 여러분께 정말 자신 있게 말씀드릴 수 있습니다. 여러분이 이스라엘에 직접 가서 그 땅을 밟아보고 그들을 만나보고 그 현장에서 기도하는 일들은 여러분의 신앙생활에서 가장 소중하고 의미 있는 시간들이 될 것입니다. 그리고 그런 시간이 될 수 있도록 저와 브래드TV는 최선을 다해 준비하겠습니다. 무조건 이스라엘만 가는 것이 중요한 것이 아닙니다. 가서 무엇을 보느냐, 누구를 만나느냐가 중요한 것이죠. 그리고 더 중요한 것은 누구와 함께 가느냐가 중요합니다. 여러분, 저와 함께 이스라엘로 가시죠. 제가 여러분을 하나님께서 약속하신 땅 이스라엘로 안내하겠습니다. 1948년 이스라엘이 재건된 이후로 지금까지 약 70여 년의 세월이 지났는데요. 그때부터 지금까지 전 세계에 흩어져 있던 수많은 유대인들이 이스라엘로 돌아오는 알리야가 진행되고 있습니다. 특히 러시아권이나 또 동유럽에 살고 있던 이 많은 유대인들이 이스라엘로 돌아가고 있는데요. 그 일을 앞장서서 또 이 주도해 오신 분이 계십니다. 출애굽 작전 선교회, 요즘은 또 이름이 바뀌었죠. 에벤에셀 선교회라고 하는데 그 에벤에셀 선교회의 전신인 출애굽 작전 선교회의 설립자이자 대표이신 스티브 라이틀 목사님을 오늘 찾아뵙고 이야기를 나누도록 하겠습니다. 목사님, 이렇게 시간 내주셔서 고맙습니다. Thank you very much.
감사합니다. It's good to be here.
제가 조금 전에 출애굽 작전 선교회로 시작했다가 나중에는 이제 에벤에셀 선교회로 이름이 바뀌었다라고 했는데, 출애굽 작전 선교회 이름도 굉장히 독특한데 그 선교회가 어떻게 처음에 시작이 되었다가 에벤에셀 선교회로 어떻게 또 이렇게 이름이 바뀌게 되었는지 그 얘기를 좀 해주시죠.
My involvement with the return of the Jewish people to Israel began in August of 1974, 42 years ago. What happened with me was God, by His grace, allowed me to see a vision. And in this vision, I saw a multitude of Jewish people. They were in the Soviet Union. And then God judged the Soviet Union till that nation came to its knees, dissolved, and the Jewish people were able to get on ships and airplanes to go home to Israel. For 6.5 years, I could tell nobody in the Western countries about that, only in the Soviet Union. Now, in 1974, there was a Soviet Union. And so I began to travel there to the Jewish communities. And so I could tell nobody about what God had shown me. But then, in 1982, in Jerusalem, Israel, I was asked to speak at a conference during the Feast of Tabernacles. And for the first time, I spoke out about the exodus of the Jews from the Soviet Union, and according to the Word of God, because it's many places in the Bible. And so when I did this, then I began to meet people that God had said the same thing to. You know, Amos 3:7 says, God does nothing till He reveals it to His servants, the prophets. And so God will tell more than just one when He's doing something. Then we have confirmation amongst each other. And then we know we're proceeding in the correct way. So then I met in 1982, later in 82, I met a very dear man in Jerusalem. His name was Gustav Schiller. He was a Swiss man that lived in England. And he invited me to come to England and to share about this vision and of which I did. And that message went out to many, many, many countries. I don't know how, but the cassette of that message. Out of that, Gustav and we began what was called Operation Exodus and the Exodus shipping line, so that we could charter jumbo jets and we could charter ships to be able to take the Jewish people home. Then, and we began that, and we began with flights, first of all, to take Jewish new immigrants home to Israel. And then we chartered a very large ship. It was 230 some meters long. It was a big ocean-going liner. And we began to take the Jewish people home. But our prophet Isaiah, 2,500 years ago, prophesied this in Isaiah chapter 60. Now, Isaiah had never seen a jumbo jet, so he's trying to explain, who are these who fly like birds to their roosts? And then he says, and they brought them also by the ships of Tarshish, and they brought them home on that. So we began what was called Operation Exodus. In the year 1991, in Jerusalem, Israel, in a prayer conference, when Saddam Hussein was sending his Katyusha rockets into Israel, and they were coming in, that during that prayer conference, the missiles are coming in to Israel, and God spoke to Gustav, it's time to start the Ebenezer Emergency Fund Operation Exodus. So that's where Ebenezer's name came in and has carried on the ministry ever since. In 1991, Ebenezer began, it's a Christian organization to help the Jewish people go home to Israel, involved in what in Hebrew we call the Aliyah. Now, Aliyah is the Hebrew word that means to go up, to ascend. And it comes from King David speaking about, let us go up to Zion. It's making Aliyah is the word. And so Israel has adopted this name for the return of the Jewish people to Israel. Ebenezer now took over from what we began and continued the work, so which still does. So it's a Christian organization. It is all around the world and helping Jewish people to go home to Israel, according to what our Jewish prophets wrote thousands of years ago. But now, Ebenezer Operation Exodus has offices in over 50 nations around the whole world, including Africa, South America, throughout Asia, and the United States. And we just opened in February of this year an office in Brooklyn, New York, because we have 2 million Jewish people just in Brooklyn, New York. And we're being asked to help Jewish people to go home. Some people, they have a misconception about Jews. They say, oh, Jews, they must be wealthy. They have much money. Oh, there's many, very poor Jewish people. And those are the ones that we help in the various nations, from South Africa, from England, from France, from the Ukraine, especially right now because of some of the things going on there. Constantly, we're helping from many nations. So yes, we started with the Soviet Union because from the vision that God by His grace allowed me to see was that. But we knew it was for all nations. And so the work has spread and spread.
지금 알리야 얘기를 해주셨는데 그 알리야에 대해서 좀 구체적으로 설명을 해주시죠. 성경에 어떻게 이 알리야에 대해서 설명이 되어 있습니까?
In many places in the Bible, for instance, you can go to even in the Torah, in the 4th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, and in Deuteronomy chapter 30, Moses speaks about that because of the rebellion of us Jewish people, we would be scattered to the furthest parts under heaven, he says. So we've been scattered to the ends of the earth. But God has a spiritual principle. What He scatters, He will gather. And so He promises in Deuteronomy chapter 30, I will gather you back to the land that I promised to your forefathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. and that we would go back to the land of Israel, then God would make a new covenant with us, the Jewish people. The prophets continued on this. For instance, Isaiah chapter 43 speaks of from a country to the north of Israel. And if you take a map of the world and you put your finger on Jerusalem, you go exactly due north, you come to Moscow. And he said, from the north of Israel and from all the nations, I will gather you and return you back to the land of Israel. We also have Jeremiah chapter 16, Jeremiah 23, Jeremiah 31, Jeremiah 32, Ezekiel chapter 11, Ezekiel chapter 20, Ezekiel 36, Ezekiel 39, Zechariah chapter 2. That's just a few of the 64 places in the scriptures God says, I will take you back to the land of Israel. And so God is fulfilling His word. He's keeping His word that He promised to us through our prophets. And we're seeing it right now. We are the witnesses of God returning the Jewish people home to Israel. Of course, Satan does not like this. So he will try to hinder, stop, thwart, do everything he can, number one, to keep the Jews from going home to Israel. But there's a reason why. See, the Bible is very, very clear of why God is taking us Jewish people home. Number one, it's a prophetic bell God is ringing. And He's saying it is what's going to happen before a greater return. And that's the return of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, of the Lord Jesus. Before He comes again, God promises He will take us back to the land. That's probably, to me, the greatest reason God has taken us Jewish people home. But that's not the only reason. There's many other reasons. It has to do with salvation of the Jewish people. It has to do with salvation of the nations. And God's plan, He promised this clear back in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3, when He said to Abram, He said, and in you all the families of Korea shall be blessed. Well, He didn't say Korea, but He said all the families of the earth shall be blessed in the seed of Abraham. He renews it with Isaac and He renews it with Jacob. And He said, in you all families of earth shall be blessed. How could all the families of the earth be blessed if we're all the Jews are in one little place? No. So God spreads us to the furthest parts under heaven. And as we're scattered out, but then He promises, I'll take you back to the land. And there's a very definite Hebrew term. It says, in the latter days. You'll find it in Deuteronomy chapter 4. You'll find it in Hosea chapter 3. And there's another one. I'm trying to think of it right at this minute, where it says, in the latter days, I will return you, Jewish people, to in the latter days. 1948, Israel is reestablished as a nation. According to our prophet Isaiah, chapter 66, can a nation be born in a day? Yes, Israel is reborn in one day. We're allowed to go home after 2,000 years out of our country. And we begin to go back home. And now, when I first began in 1974 to travel in the Soviet Union, it was impossible for Jewish people to go to Israel. We were being persecuted, we were put in prisons, and many things were happening there. But God promised that even out of that country of the north, and so God judged the Soviet Union. And that nation did collapse, and the Jewish people came out and got on ships and airplanes and still going home. Today, since 1990, we have over 1.4 million Russian-speaking Jewish people in Israel. It's a miracle, but it's what our prophet said. So God is keeping His word, but He has a reason. Why to all the nations? Because God promised that the Jewish people would be a blessing to all families of the whole earth. So then we have, for instance, in Ezekiel chapter 36, God says, in front of the eyes of the Gentiles, I will take you back home to Israel, right in front of their eyes, so that those nations can come to know that I am the Lord. It's end-time evangelism. It releases. If people are really interested in evangelism, pray for the return of the Jews to go home to Israel. God will bring salvation to the nations, and according to His word, and salvation to the Jewish people. His promise is, you take them home. By the way, it's the duty of the Gentiles. That's also our prophet said. When you do that, then He said, I'll make a new covenant with the Jewish people once I get them back in the land of Israel. The largest Messianic congregation in all of Israel today is Russian speaking. And they came not knowing who the Messiah is. They didn't know Jesus was the Messiah. In Hebrew, we call Him Yeshua HaMashiach. And they didn't know Him. But once they got to Israel, then God met with them, exactly as He promised through our prophets. In January of this year in Jerusalem, we had the conference, the 25th conference of Operation Exodus, Ebenezer. We had 40 people there from the former Soviet Union. They were from many parts, from Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and different places. And I asked all those that were representative of those nations, please stand. I asked everybody else to turn and look at them, because I said, I want to ask a question, and I want you to see what God has done. And so then I asked the question of these people. I said, how many of you received Jesus after the year 1990 and the Jewish people began to go to Israel? Every hand went up. None of them had met Jesus before 1990. Though that doesn't mean that God didn't save people before. It's just in this group. But when I go to large churches in Russia now, I ask that same question. And over 99% of all people in those churches received Jesus after the Jewish people began to go home to Israel. And which is exactly what the prophet says. The Gentiles, you take the Jewish people to Israel, I'll meet with them in Israel, but I also will release evangelism in those nations. And so He's done it. God has a wonderful plan of evangelism.
이스라엘 정부 입장에서는 어땠습니까? 그렇게 막 이 러시아에서 유대인들이 들어오는 거에 대해서 거부감을 갖거나 뭐 좀 자제해달라고 부탁을 하거나 아니면 어떻게 환영하는 그런 분위기였는지 어땠었습니까?
Good question. One thing about the Israeli government, they have what's called the right of the law of return. Every Jewish person in the world has the right to go to Israel, and they want them to come. When you read the prophets, for instance, in Isaiah and especially in Jeremiah, and you read, for instance, Jeremiah chapter 31, and it talks about God would bring the lame, the blind, the elderly, as well as the young and the woman with child and the thing. So you're going to have all kinds of people are going to come, but they will break into joy. And there will be dancing, it says in Jeremiah 31, when they come back to the land of Israel. When we would bring the ship in to Haifa, when we first caught sight of the shore of Israel, oh, the people, you've never seen joy till you saw their faces of when we're going home. We're coming home. They've left their persecution behind. They're going home. When we got there, Israeli government is right there, gives them a place to live. They begin to put them in schools to teach them Hebrew immediately. It's called an ulpan. They give them a monthly income to get them, to help them to get into the Israeli society and find jobs and everything. So the government has a very large program to bring, to help the Jewish people from all over.
러시아 쪽에서 온 유대인들도 있지만 또 아프리카에서 온 유대인도 있고 또 미국에서 좀 여유 있게 살다가 온 유대인들도 있는데 러시아 쪽에서 온 유대인들은 경제적으로 이렇게 넉넉하지 않은 그런 것 같아요. 이스라엘에 왔다가 이스라엘의 어떤 이 사회 구조에 적응하지 못하고 힘들어하다가 다시 또 돌아가는 경우도 있습니까?
Sorry to say, yes, that has happened. Some people, they find it is such a different life. And some people, they can't cope with it. But it is still, they find out it's the only safe place they really have is to be in Israel. And so there have been those that said, you know, we can't make it here. In the beginning, back in the 1990s, in the early years, we had, in a 2-year period, 80,000 engineers from the Soviet Union. All, boom. Well, where are they going to have a job? We had 20,000 medical doctors, just boom. Well, we have a lot of doctors already in Israel. We had 70 full philharmonic orchestras immigrated in 2-year period. What are you going to do with 70, orchestras? And so there was a lot of problems had to be worked through because there were only certain people. Israel is a very small country, and you can only have so many orchestras, and so we had many wonderful musicians and things, and on and on and on. We had so many very intellectual people come to Israel, and so Israel began to think, what can we do? They came up with this. This is one of the ideas they came up with. They decided to go to the African nations and say, you have trouble with engineering, with water in your deserts, with different things, and they began to export the brain power. They would take the experts, they would take these people to different nations to allow them to help those countries to develop. It has been a great benefit for Israel now through the years because the African nations are saying, these people are really our friends because they have some of the exact same problems Israel does that Israel has been able to work through, like water. I mean, water is a very, very big problem in many countries, and so in Israel it was. But if you go to Israel today, you see the multitudes of forests and trees and everything because they began to learn how to take care of the water they did have and to be able to make things grow. And so now they export that knowledge and things and the people. So they were able to begin to employ these people in very creative ways. Does everybody, find a place? I wish they did, but not every single person does, but it's a very small percentage that do not. And so the most of the people, they do. And, Jewish people are pretty smart. And so they're able to begin many, many things, and that's happening.
제2의 엑소더스, 출애굽 작전이라고 이야기하실 만큼 그렇게 많은 사람들이 이스라엘로 돌아오는 그 과정 만만치 않았을 것 같은데 그때 당시 상황을 좀 설명해 주시죠.
What we didn't know, the customs in the former Soviet Union, they were going to take all baby diapers away from the mothers. It was really heartbreaking and see how they were, what they were doing to the Jewish people. And our capitalization is $2. I thought, but I had no money. I didn't have any money. I had a vision, but I had no money. It's been awesome just to watch God. That's how it all began.